Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Everyone online and in person, Alhamdulillah, we are gathered here again on a beautiful Saturday morning to read Falsafah Hidup with Prof. Khairudin Aljunied. This is the 6th session on the chapter of Sifat Berani. So last week, on the last session, Prof. Khai already took us through the chapter on Sederhana. So inshallah, we will let him take us through Sifat Berani as well. So, Prof, I think I'll let you take it away.
Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. As I had discussed last week, that one of the important things that HAMKA stress in Falsafah Hidup is the importance of being moderate in everything we do. Moderate in terms of intentions, moderate in terms of how we do our work, moderation also in terms of our aims, so that we are not stressed out like we are in Singapore, doing things more than we should or we could. But today, we're going to go on to look at another issue that he brought up, which to him is not only part of the philosophy of life, but also an ingredient to achieving the ultimate happiness in life, where he talks about the importance of courage, right? Apa yang kita cakap dalam bahasa Melayu sebagai berani. And why do HAMKA bring this point up? Because during his time, he was in the face of people who are very afraid of achieving something for themselves. So it's almost a kind of contradiction here. On the one hand, he said one must be moderate and not be extreme in terms of achieving everything that they want in life. But on the other hand, one must also be courageous. Courageous in the face of the trials of life. Courageous in the face of challenges that may come in the little things that we do in life. So we're going to talk about it. But before we go on, before we talk about this book, which we have done so for the past 5 to 6 weeks, I want to recommend everyone to read this book by Daniel Putnam, P-U-T-N-A-M. And the title of the book, which is in line with what HAMKA discussed in this book, the title of the book is Psychological Courage. Now, what's interesting about this book, which I will link back to HAMKA, is that he talks about 3 forms of courage, which is so important for all human beings. The first is what he calls as physical courage, berani untuk menghadapi cobaan hidup dengan dirinya sendiri. I mean, with your life and with your hands physically. Then he talks about moral courage, the courage to speak up when you have to. And sometimes in our culture, dulu lagi kita sebagai orang Melayu di masyarakat Melayu, we are afraid to say something that is from our hearts, because we have always been taught since we are young to, orang kata, menyimpan pekong di dada. And we know, if you know the word pekong, pekong in Malay means wound. Alright, a wound that is already kind of gangrenous in terms of its essence, and that may result to other problems. And of course, he talks about psychological courage. And he says, Daniel Putnam says that if you have this kind of 3 courages, three types of courage, you can face all sorts of problems in life, whether it be addictions, phobias, or even obsession. Some people are so obsessed, like me when I was young. I'm very obsessed with work. I love to just do work. There was a time, if I can share with you, I was on screen doing my work, writing and researching, for 4 hours on end until the vein of my right eye burst. And it was, my eyes were bleeding, basically. Until today, the wound is still there. So if I stay on screen more than 2 hours, the vein will start to rupture, so I don't do it anymore.
I see.
Yeah, so the courage to stop what you are doing and to avoid self-deception and mistake. So I want to quote from HAMKA on page 245, where he says, keberanian yang dalam bahasa Arab disebut sebagai syaja'ah. So the Arabs use the word syaja'ah. Now the word syaja'ah, if you look at it from the linguistic point of view, and of course some of the listeners are better in Arabic than me, means more than courage. It means fortitude, the ability to withstand pain, even if it is the most extreme. And you know, among the Arabs in the past, during the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, especially, they went through harsh treatment by the Meccans, but they're able to endure, because in their culture, to endure pain is to exhibit the highest form of humanity. I repeat, to endure pain is to exhibit the highest form of humanity, because human beings are the one that can endure the most pain, actually, if you think about it. And the people who can endure the most, that has the highest syaja'ah, is not men. So kakak-kakak and makcik-makcik, adik-adik who are listening in, it is women who can endure pain. So psychological studies have shown that women are able to withstand pain more than men, and precisely the case, they can give birth. So Hamid, when your wife finally gives birth,
Inshallah.
you will see how painful it is. That's why Rasulullah SAW says in one hadith, any woman who gives birth and dies when she was trying to give birth to the child, that lady is a syahid. So he says syaja'ah itu terbagi kepada dua bahagian. Keberanian semangat, that means to be brave in terms of your will, right? The courageous in terms of the will, and keberanian hati, your heart is strong. So I just want to throw that one first, then we roll from there.
Okay, again, so thank you, Prof. That was a good opening. So, Prof, maybe just to pick your mind a bit on Hamka's background. So, I think when we're reading Hamka's book and when Hamka talks about courage, I think that's when we should pay attention, because he was probably one of the more courageous ulama in his community. And I think I just wanted to read one paragraph from page 223 where he says, demikianlah orang yang berani menyatakan faham baru. So here he's talking about the responsibility of scholars to bring forth new opinions and to have the courage to do so. Then he says, orang itu memang selalu datang mendahului zamannya. So they always come ahead of their time. Orang-orang yang sama hidup dengan dia belum kenal akan dia. Kelak mereka akan takluk juga. Sekurang-kurangnya orang marah kerana kritiknya, tetapi dengan diam-diam orang turuti apa yang dikatakannya. So Prof, I can just ask, in this paragraph, is he talking about himself?
He was talking about himself partly, and this is where one of the weaknesses of Hamka, I would say, is that sometimes he does see himself as a kind of the renewal of his society, because many of these reformers, they always see that they have the responsibility to change the condition of their society. But more importantly, I think he was trying to make the point that people who are able to change the minds of societies are the people whom in their time are the most unappreciated people. Because society cannot understand why are they saying certain things. And this is, I would say, kind of the curse of the intelligent mind. When you are utterly intelligent, you see things that people don't. You know the story of this thinker called John Nash, I think. Yeah, so he came out with this idea, the theory, they call it game theory. When he was proposing the idea, everybody thought this guy is a madman. But many years later, after he got into so much psychological, they made a movie out of it. A Beautiful Mind. Right? Then they could see it. So Hamka is making this point because he says that even though people cannot understand you, it is your right and your responsibility to say what you feel for something that you know can benefit the society around you. And this is where that requires certain kind of ability to take the hit. People who are, kind of futuristic, they are always marginalized by society. And that's why Rasulullah SAW say, "Qulil haqq walau kana murran." Say the truth, even though the truth may be hurtful or may be bitter to some people.
Okay, thank you, Prof. And maybe just continuing from there, in page 225, he continues and he says, ada pun orang yang enggan menyatakan keyakinannya kerana takut akan dikritik, segan menyatakan pendirian kerana takut akan dibenci, adalah orang yang pengecut. And then this reminded me of, because recently I was reading about Ustaz Ahmad Sun Haji.
InsyaAllah.
There was a compilation of all his khutbahs from, I think it was a 10-year compilation. And then within his khutbahs back in the day, he used to tell the men straightforward, after Solat Jumaat, don't waste time hanging around the masjid, go straight back to work, because we're living in a community where you have working hours. And then I reflect on the khutbah Jumaat nowadays, and the tone is definitely much more intellectual.
Yes.
But I do feel that that many men can benefit from this attitude that Hamka mentions over here, which is don't be afraid of getting critiqued on addressing men directly, and then he says at the end of this paragraph, why don't people critique the community more? And then he says, sebab bukan pembela kebenaran tetapi pembela namanya sendiri. So maybe sometimes we are more afraid of taking care of our own name than stating what needs to be said.
And I think we have, I like it that you brought up the issue of khutbah, because khutbah, the khutbah of Jum'ah, is supposed to be a time, even though short, but a life-changing moment for Muslims. Now, if you look at most khutbah in our part of the world, except for certain places in Indonesia, and even I just came back from South Thailand, our khutbahs have generally become formalistic rituals, right? They become something, I mean, it's one thing that it's scripted. Sometimes it's good that khutbahs are scripted, because if it's not scripted, I've been to khutbahs in the UK where the imam start talking about boxing and all this kind of stuff, you know, the issues of the day, and then forgot what's the big point. But it becomes a problem when the khatib, who is supposed to be the most courageous person. So back to Shaja'ah. Why does khutbah starts with Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu taqullaha haqqa tuqati? The khatib is reminding the people that you must have taqwa of the highest form of taqwa, because he is supposed to be the embodiment of that taqwa. And then he will read this ayat, Inna Allaha ya'muru bil adli wal ihsan. Allah enjoins us to uphold justice and to spread good, to do ihsan. Because he is supposed to be the most courageous person. Now the problem is that we have sometimes, I'm not talking about Singapore, khatibs who are scared when they're giving their khutbahs, when actually they are supposed to be the most courageous person up there. And that's why, you see, the beautiful thing about Islam is that the khatib must always be above everybody else. Why don't you just sit down? Right? Why does the khatib has to stand up? Of course, the practical thing is that so that his voice can be heard. But with microphones now, he can just sit down and give his khutbah. The reason why he is standing up, because he is there to tell everyone, men especially who are made compulsory to go to Salatul Jum'ah, to be courageous. That's why in Surah Jum'ah, it's so beautiful. If you go back to the Quran, in Surah Jum'ah, Allah says, فَإِذَا قُدِيَتِ الصَّلَاةُ فَانْتَشِرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَابْتَغُوا مِنْ فَضْلِ اللَّهِ. When you have finished, and go back to Ustaz Sun Haji, when you have finished your Friday prayers, فَانْتَشِرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ, spread onto the earth. I mean, if you understand the word فَانْتَشِرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ, basically it means just go everywhere, right? Allah encourage Muslims, especially the men, go everywhere in search of the risk and the opportunities for you. So the khutbah is supposed to be a time where courage is instilled to men. Courage to do good things, to uphold justice. And that is I think you hit it. You hit the nail right into the coffin. Hope we can open the coffin back again.
Inshallah. And I think just extending from you as well, you talked about courage on the part of the khatib. I think there's courage required on the part of the listener as well. And one lost adab that is missing nowadays is people have forgotten that the khatib has right over the eyes of the people in the Jum'ah. So the men who are always looking down and speaking and looking everywhere except where the khatib is.
You mentioned this. When I was younger, there was this ustaz who just passed on. I love him very much, mashallah. His name is Ustaz Tengku Fauzi, and I'm sure those people who are listening to me knows Ustaz Tengku Fauzi. In his younger days, just for the listeners to know, and if you're from Malaysia or elsewhere, this man is a legend, right? When he gives the khutbah and he sees people sleeping, he will say this, datang solat Jumaat kau tidur. All of us, especially we were in campus, right? Tidur tak boleh tidur. So for me it is about waking you up, right? Waking you up to becoming courageous, waking us up in order to do good things in life. Now, I just want to go on from that, Hamid. Very interesting point that you have brought up. In page 251, Hamka says, tidaklah satu bangsa akan tegak. And very powerful, Orang Minang, bila dia pakai perkataan tegak, when they use the word tegak, it doesn't mean upright, but strong, right? Dan sesuatu fahaman dapat berdiri kalau antara bangsa itu sendiri tidak ada yang berani menyatakan kebenaran. Sebab tiap-tiap bangsa amat segan mengubah yang lama. Dia hendak tetap pada yang lama, padahal kadang-kadang tidak sesuai dengan zamannya. To be courageous, to say things when things are not right. But to say things, as we have shared in the other sessions, to say things not only in terms of upholding the truth, but to say it with love. Watawasau bil sabri, watawasau bil marhamah. That means you say it because you love your community, and he emphasizes this. Actually, I think one issue that we have in our community is that when there's a problem, we don't want to say it. Now, I want to ask you, Hamid, why is it that in our community, when there is a problem, we don't want to say it? Kalau ada masalah, apa kita buat?
Diam.
Kita diam. Kenapa?
I think we touched on this in one of the previous sessions, I think.
Ahmad Nisfu kata, cakap.
Yeah,
Kalau you watch P. Ramlee movie, Sinema Menjalapuk, Samsudin didn't want to say anything. He was very scared, and then this Ahmad Nisfu is the director. He opened his mouth and said, cakap. Why don't we want to say anything?
I think one thing is definitely a lack of courage, which is why Hamka is writing this. Another thing is probably maybe a lack of knowledge, a lack of exposure to the greatness of people in the past, and how they spoke, how they address things straight on as what they are. For me, I think that's roughly.
But Hamka answers the question also. He says in page 254, adapun orang yang enggan menyatakan keyakinannya kerana takut akan dikritik. So why are we so afraid to say the right things, even in the family that you see something is wrong? Is because you are afraid to be criticized. That's number one. Segan menyatakan pendirian kerana takut akan dibenci. You are afraid to be hated. When you speak up with courage, soon enough people will love you because you say things that they actually need. Just like when a doctor tells you you're not supposed to eat too much salty food or sugary food because you're going to get high blood pressure and diabetes. Adalah orang yang pengecut. So he says that this is the problem of his time, where authors, especially people who write books, they are afraid to write the truth and say the truth, termasuk ulama-ulama pada waktu dia. Tegasnya, he says, pembela periuk nasinya. They are afraid because they are only taking care of their rice bowl. They are afraid to be minoritized in society, and I think we face the same problem right now.
Yeah, Prof, and maybe just extending from that as well. One very good reminder from Hamka's life itself is that when you state the truth, sometimes you may not have the honor of being acknowledged for your bravery while you are still alive, because Hamka himself, he was prosecuted towards the end of his life, forgotten in Indonesian literature for a while, before. Correct me if I'm wrong, Prof. Before a revival by the publishers, and the revival now, especially in the Malaysian publishing scene. So, a harsh but beneficial reminder that sometimes your recompense is in the hereafter as well, for your bravery, for your courage. But maybe, I don't know if there's anything on your end. I wanted to highlight a beneficial part here on Hamka's sharing of 5 points to instill courage in the youth, in the children. Prof, maybe you want to, I think it's better if you cover it.
What page is that? On the 5 points?
226 on mine.
226, okay. Which one is mine? You read it first?
Oh, you can. Untuk menanamkan bibit keberanian kepada anak-anak, maka ahli-ahli pendidik, terutamanya di benua Eropah dan Amerika, mendapat beberapa jalan. Di antaranya, and I like this first point, menggiatkan pelajaran olahraga kepada anak muda sehingga badannya kuat dan sihat. Olahraga itu bermacam-macam, antara lain sepak bola, renang, senam, mendaki bukit, berburu dan lain-lain.
Let's stop there first. It's so interesting. He says that the people who are active, especially in sports, are the people who will be most courageous. Why? The reason is very simple. When you engage in sports, you also engage your mind, your body and your heart. And when you do that, I mean, it takes a lot of courage for you to go out there and just take a jog. Because you're going to sweat, sometimes it's a bit painful, especially if you're going for a long jog. The first 10 minutes is hellish, and then the next 10 minutes is pleasure, and the next 10 minutes is you wonder why you're doing it. But to even do it is actually to him a show of bravery. And I think this is the first thing that we mentioned it before, and we should mention it again today. Kita ni telah menjadi masyarakat yang takut bersenam, tapi tak takut bermakan makanan. Right? So we become a society that is afraid to go out and just be active.
Yes,
And this is a bit different when we look at other communities.
Yes,
In the morning, you see them out there. When I was in Hong Kong recently, in the morning, you see all these uncles. I bet some of them are like 80 years old, and they are doing Tai Chi, they are doing all kinds of things. You ask them, why are they doing it? They say want to live longer. Yeah, but Muslims want to
die faster.
Okay.
I apologize to anyone who does.
So what's the second one?
Prof, just extending from that as well. This is book that I read recently. I highly recommend it to you as well. First book in a while which I read from cover to cover. The book is called The Tao of War.
Yes.
And I think the author, you read it before. He mentions this very important point on every man's need to have some capacity for violence.
Correct.
Because and then he mentions why many men nowadays have a false understanding of masculinity or incorrect understanding of masculinity is because they are unsure of their own capacity for violence, such that if violence is inflicted on them, the insecurity comes from not knowing if you have the ability to respond. And as a man, and then he also mentions one of the downsides of modernity, which is the outsourcing of security.
Correct.
Because nowadays when men get into altercations, they call the police. But back then, if you call the police, they arrive in 2 hours. So the man has to be able to defend themselves, which is why I think Hamka mentions berburu is hunting. Hunting and basically things that have to do with the body, strengthening the body. Next point, point 2. Mengajarkan riwayat para pahlawan dan orang besar, yakni orang yang telah mengorbankan diri dan jiwanya, hartanya dan hidupnya untuk mempertahankan bangsa, tanah air dan agama. Orang yang berani berterus terang menyatakan kebenaran walau dibenci dan dihinakan, tetapi akhirnya mereka menang. So telling stories of the past, the warriors of the past. Very important. Third point, biasakan berterus terang bercakap-cakap. Jangan terlalu banyak ambil muka, tenggang menenggang, tetapi hendaklah sopan. Teguh di dalam keyakinan dan jujur. So speaking in a straightforward manner. Number 4, tidak percaya kepada khurafat, tidak peduli kepada dongeng kuno yang menimbulkan takut pada hantu, kuntilanak dan lain-lain yang asalnya hanya untuk mengenak-enakkan tidur atau untuk nakuti anak-anak agar tidak menangis, padahal bekasnya kepada jiwa sangat sukar mengikisnya.
Okay, let's stop that one.
Another very important
point. Where in our community, if you want to make money out of movies, make
horror movies.
So in our society, for the longest time, and Hamka was very forthright about this, is we like to scare each other.
Yes.
Semalam aku nampak Putiana, lusa aku lihat aku nampak penanggal. I'm not saying that these beings don't exist. Don't get me wrong. There's a whole surah in the Quran called Surah Jinn. So do read it. Right? The jinn exists. These beings exist. But it becomes a problem when everything you do in life, you blame it on the jinn. Because sometimes the jinn didn't do anything. And much like animals, you see snakes in the jungles. These beings live with us. If you are only scared of these beings, you become people who are not confident of yourself. That's why Allah says in the Quran that we are ahsanul taqwim, the best of creation, and we must learn to deal with their presence. Betul lah, kadang-kadang orang cakap, oh ternampak lah bayang-bayangan and so forth. If you see it, astaghfirullahalazim, but don't scare other people. Nowadays, especially when I was staying in one country, I don't want to mention it, every day there is a horror stories. Dia ni nampak tu, dia tu nampak ni, dia ni kena kejar dengan ni. And my father, whenever I tell, my father is like the one who dislike this kind of stories. When I was young, and I told him that, Abah, I heard this story about somebody got kena cekik lah dengan ni. My father would say, kau pernah baca tak kat dalam surat khabar, lelaki mati dicekik kuntilanak? So I've never read about this before. Until now I remember this. My father is already in his late 70s. I said, I've never. Then why are you so afraid of this? He said, my father, when somebody tells him that this house is haunted,
he goes inside.
He will go there to show to everybody that it is not. Of course, the house is haunted, and he knows it too. But he is trying to make the point, between him and me, I am the better creation,
Hello.
I respect him and he should be respecting me. So jangan kita menakut-nakutkan satu sama lain. Dan yang paling penting, the most important thing, do not watch horror movies. Do not watch horror movies. Why I say this? Because go back to psychology, many psychological studies have shown, and this is beautiful, it's actually mentioned in the book by Edward Said called Covering Islam. Do read it. Edward Said talks about how Islam has been cast as an enemy of the West and a bad thing in world history. And then he gives the analogy. He says, a shark can attack human beings, right? But if you say that all sharks attack human beings, you are demonizing the shark. The same is it with a tiger. If you don't enter into the tiger's territory, the tiger doesn't disturb you. But the tiger is a very predatorial animal. Stay away from him, respect his domain and your domain, and you're fine. The same is it dengan hantu, syaitan dan sebagainya. They exist. You don't scare yourself beyond what is necessary. Don't magnify a problem such that, as Hamka say, it affects your syaja'ah, keberanian.
Yes. And one more thing, Prof mentioned not watching horror movies. Now there's a lot of Ruqyah podcasts that tell stories of all the Ruqyah stories on the radio, basically jam 12. I mean, legendary. Fun to listen to, but I think one important nuance that people miss is don't listen to it in front of children particularly. And this is what Hamka is talking about, listing out the five things to take note of to instill courage in children. And then the last point, memperkaya akal dengan ilmu yang memberi faedah sehingga dapat mengetahui hakikat sesuatu sehingga tidak ada lagi pintu terbuka untuk mengizinkan khurafat masuk ke dalam. So this is just a reinforcement of the previous point.
So from all these 5 points, the big issue that Hamka wants to bring up when it comes to courage is the issue of people with knowledge and people in leadership position. His target is actually them, right? He's basically saying in the part of the chapter called Buya Keberanian, he begins the chapter with this. He says that there are many clever people during his time. Ilmunya dalam, right? Mereka tahu banyak perkara, they know a lot of things, but they live in fear. And because they live in fear, the knowledge that they have doesn't go to society. There are people who do not know so many things, but because they are courageous, society benefits from their knowledge. That goes back actually to a very powerful maxim that was put forth by Imam Ahmad Ibn Hanbal. Ahmad has a very beautiful maxim where he says, if you have a choice between a leader who is al-fajirul qawi, who is strong but he's wicked. He is strong but he's wicked. That means he doesn't like you, he punishes you. Right? He doesn't like this man, he puts this guy to prison. He said between that leader, fajirul qawi, and another one who is salihul da'if, that means he is pious but he is weak. He says choose the guy who is qawi, who is strong. Why? He says because that guy, even though he is wicked, there are times where he is needed for the community. He is wicked sometimes to himself, maybe he does bad things, but when it comes to defending the public, he is always in front. Rather than the other guy, dia beribadah, dia buat semua benda yang baik, but then when it comes to defending the public, he doesn't stand up. So choose a leader who is strong. And the same is it to me, not only political leadership or community leadership, the same is it with religious leadership. That in our selection of leaders, it is not enough that the person is knowledgeable. It is not enough that the person is pious. It's not enough that the person knows a lot of things. If you examine the history of Southeast Asia, and I wrote this in my book Contemplating Sufism, where I mentioned that if you look at the sheikh of the Sufi tariqah in Southeast Asia in the past, especially the tariqah of Naqshbandiyah and also Samaniya, they are all courageous people. They defend the community much as they defend the knowledge that the community needs. And this is, I think, something that we need to, again, spread the message to everyone, that it is not enough for us to study, it is also very important for us to be confident to put our ideas there.
Yes, and I think connecting what Prof just mentioned to the common man, what does this look like? So in the third paragraph under Buya Keberanian, he says, dalam pergerakan banyak ahli pidato menyatakan fikiran, didengar orang nasihatnya. Padahal dia menyebut sesuatu ayat Al-Quran atau lafaz hadis Nabi, bacaannya tidak fasih, nahunya tidak lurus. Apa sebabnya dia beroleh kemenangan dan kejayaan? Jawabnya hanya satu, dia berani. So and then he continues after he says oh no, this is later on. So basically he's saying what is the reason that people who may not deliver their knowledge in a eloquent manner, what is the reason that they are still successful in reaching out to people? Is for the simple fact that they are brave, and this is what we see on social media as well.
Exactly.
The knowledgeable people tend to shy away from social media, and for justified reasons sometimes.
Yeah.
But what ends up happening is the media, the online space now is dominated by charlatans, you know. So this is exactly what Hamka.
Correct. So there is also what they call as courage that is bordering on the side of folly, and courage that is bordering on the side of wisdom. There's two kinds of knowledge.
Yes.
Now the question we want to ask is, what is the reason why some people are courageous on the side of wisdom? And he says in page 271, kunci semuanya adalah berani mengorbankan kepentingan diri sendiri untuk keperluan masyarakat. And this is the thing that makes people who have knowledge, who have wisdom, become very, very courageous, because they themselves or their lives is not as important as the welfare of the entire community. They put the community first before themselves. And some knowledgeable people that we know in our society, they put themselves above their community, and that's why they become afraid. Why they become afraid? Because in speaking up, they stand to lose a lot of things. But for people who understand that the future of the community means the future of their own children, the future of the generations to come, they put themselves last. They speak up when they have to. They defend the truth when they are required to. Now, he goes on. There is a chapter on kemuliaan where he cites Sheikh Muhammad Abdu. Sheikh Muhammad Abdu was a reformer in Egypt in the late 19th century and early 20th century. On page 274, he says, Sheikh Muhammad Abdu says that in order for you to have courage and to achieve kemuliaan hidup, he says, to achieve honor in life, you must do certain things, he says. You must know, he said there, that any struggle that you engage in will lead to certain losses. So, walaupun anyone who decides to be brave, who decides to stand up for something, must understand that there is something that the person will lose, right? A short-term loss. But the short-term loss will lead to a long-term gain. Much like we tell our children or our spouse, please don't do certain things because it will lead to certain harm. It will lead to a lot of pain in your heart and in their hearts. Short-term. In the long run, the person will see actually what you are trying to do for them or for the society becomes a good thing. And Hamka says here, it becomes what he calls as kemuliaan jasa. That means an honorable contribution. And the honorable contribution in 275, he says, pertama, jasa lahir yang dapat dilihat. Kedua, jasa batin yang dapat difikir. Whenever we speak the truth, we tell someone to sort things out, we do something that makes society better, you will achieve two things. Physically, you see a change. You tell someone, stop smoking, right? Physically, you will see that the person becomes healthier. But more importantly, when you tell someone to do certain good things, you see it especially in the batin. The person then changes the person's total worldview and lifestyle and become a much better person. So this is something that we need to take note of. And the more important thing, I just want to go on a little bit to say that whatever that we have done in view of the courage that we have to sort things out in society, these things sometimes are not remembered. These things are not remembered.
Yes.
There is a thinker by the name of Marcus Aurelius. They made a movie out of it called Gladiator, right? And I will encourage you to read it because a lot of his thoughts are very, very Islamic. He has a beautiful book called Meditations. He's actually the father of Stoic philosophy, Stoicism. He says in a very beautiful quote, "So many people were remembered, already forgotten, and those who remembered them, long gone." He talks about these people who are cowards. These cowards, when they were living during that time, they were remembered for their cowardly act. The brave people were forgotten. But he says, the irony of life is that the cowards are the people who are always more easily forgotten. And the brave people are the ones who will be remembered for generations and generations. So it's a good reminder for us when we talk about jasa, orang-orang yang berani.
Yes, that was amazing, Prof. Yeah, and maybe just extending from that, Hamka he goes on and Hamka shares. He says, basically what he's trying to say in page 230 is that if you don't have much in life, but you instill in yourself the proper kind of courage, which is what he helps us understand here, then you can achieve anything. And I think here he's quoting his own life story. So I'm going to read quite a funny passage. He says, someone asked him, sekarang, okay, basically the background here is that Hamka was kind of an autodidact. So he studied a lot of subjects himself, and he didn't have proper certification in many of the fields that he writes about. But someone asked him, sekarang sudahkah tuan mempunyai ijazah? Because the person obviously knows that he doesn't. And then he says, belum, barangkali ijazah itu baru akan saya dapatkan di kubur sahaja. Tetapi saya telah menandatangani berpuluh ijazah dari murid-murid saya. Demikian jawabnya. Satu jawapan yang tepat. Yeah, so he says, yeah. So he says, here he's basically using himself as inspiration, and he says that if you can instill in yourself a certain kind of courage and istiqamah, because he says that it took him 20 years, but instilling in himself that courage allowed him to reach to the point that he was at, teaching himself whatever was necessary. And of course, he is no stranger to certification as well. He was presented a doctorate at Al-Azhar, where he famously talked about Abdul as well in his lecture. So, yeah.
Now, when he gives that example, he's actually also talking about the obstacle that people who are courageous would face. What is the obstacle? In page 279, he says, the big obstacle of courageous people is the simple word that everybody knows, hasad, dengki. Right? He says it powerfully here. Hasad, dengki, melihat kemajuan orang lain dalam perkara yang sepasal ini adalah rajanya segala macam hasad dengki di dunia. Lebih besar hasad dengki orang terhadap orang yang berjasa ini daripada terhadap harta benda, kekayaan dan kebangsawanan. He says that people are more jealous, envious and evil towards people who are contributing to society than to rich people. We are jealous when we see rich people. We are jealous when we see people with kebangsawanan, that means they have status in society. He says these people are jealous of them, but people are more jealous of people who are brave in saying things that make society better. Again, another irony of life. When these people who are brave in speaking up, usually they don't have resources. Usually they don't have positions. But Hamka says, the moment one decides to be brave, the moment one decides to say things as they are, that's when you will see people saying things that are bad about you. Now, the question is, what do we do when people say bad things about us?
Generally, the guidance from the books of Tasawwuf is not to layan.
Not to layan. So what do we do? Kalau orang cakap benda pasal kita, panggil kita bermacam-macam nama dan sebagainya, what do we do? What do we do? Hamka says very nicely that we must have what he calls in the chapter called Muruwah. Muruwah dalam bahasa Melayu kita panggil maruah. Muruwah in Arabic basically actually means manliness, right? To be manly. And in page 284 he interprets it as muruwah adalah kepandaian menjaga dan memelihara, suka mengalah kerana kemaslahatan orang lain. Bahawasanya yang lebih banyak menderita ialah sesiapa yang menjadi ketua kerana muruwahnya. So he says, in order to deal with people who are very envious of you, who talk bad about you, is to ensure that you have your gates. Right? Establish your gates, pagar-pagar.
Yes.
That means you must know the boundaries of how much you should respond to them. So like you say in the books of Tasawuf, the scholars of Tasawuf will say, if people talk bad about you, pray good for them. If people speak ill about you, say only good things about them.
Yes.
But if they do things that are evil in public, say the things that they do that the public knows. Don't say beyond it. Because you will be lower than them if you behave exactly like them. That is Muruwah. Muruwah means to practice a kind of dignity and dignified position, and they call it position in social science word, they call it positionality. Right? To have a position where you know your value, hence you do not stoop low into their level. And that requires courage actually. The courage to tell yourself, don't behave like them. And this is very tough. Because once you hear somebody says, kau tahu tak, dia tu macam gini, dia ni macam gini, dia tu macam gitu, we become very reactive. We become very emotional. We become very vengeful sometimes. And then we start talking about things of the people who talk about us worse than what they say about us. So kita pula jadi hasad dengki, kita pula jadi macam dia, and we should try to avoid that.
Yes. And I think just building on from that, from Prof advice. Yesterday my brother asked me, I mean, how do I treat my friends who talk bad things about me? Exactly this problem. So I read to him this part from Bidayatul Hidayah, Imam Ghazali, under the chapter of companionship with unknown common men. It's just a short paragraph, but it's exactly what Hamka says. The rules of companionship with the common men are avoidance of engagement in conversation with them, to listen very little to the news and the rumours they spread, to feign unconcern with the bad words that they habitually utter, to guard against meeting them frequently and being in need of them, and to warn them of their evil deeds with compassion. But if there is no hope that they will accept it, then don't admonish them. So very simple few lines from Imam Ghazali also. There's a certain kind of stoicism that a Muslim man should have, so that we are not affected by bad things that people say.
But it is very, very tough.
Yeah, it's tough.
The moment your ears hear things that are not to your liking, kan, especially like, I don't know, they call it orang-orang yang mulut laser lah. I learned this in Malaysia, you know, where when they say something about you, it cuts right through your heart all the way into your liver and then into your gut, you know, and you feel like, I'm gonna really give it back to them. This is where you must tell yourself that you must have the courage to control your own emotions. And to control your own emotions is to know that you are a dignified person. And dignified people don't respond to people who do not have dignity. People who are always envious about other people are the people who don't have self-dignity. That's why they are envious. Because if they know that they have something that are significant, they need not feel insecure about any other person who have more than them, who have more status, more fame, more whatever than them. But precisely because they feel so low about themselves, that's why they have to put down other people. And that's why in societies, and here there are many studies on this. Jared Diamond wrote a book called Collapse, where he talks about societies that collapse. Of course, he talks about the problem of environment, but if you take the whole idea of why society collapse, societies that collapse the fastest are societies where people feel insecure about the people in their own society. Societies that are resilient, that become very, very powerful internationally, globally, and the Japanese is one good example, are the societies that are confident about themselves and the people around them. So they become highly cohesive societies. And that's why I think in our community we need to stop this. We need to stop being envious about each other. We need to stop feeling insecure. Somebody got something. Alhamdulillah, we have a hadith of Rasulullah SAW where Rasulullah says that if you doa for your brother for something that is good, the malaikat will amin the same thing for yourself. So if your brother got promoted, if your brother got money, if your brother got a lot of wealth, whatever, may Allah give him even more wealth, and Allah will give you the exact same thing. So this is something that we need to have. But to have this, Hamka says in page 303 of my version, he talks about percaya kepada diri sendiri. So this is very interesting. If you read a lot of these self-help books, there is always this mantra called believe in yourself, right? And he says that in the starting of that whole section, he says, percaya kepada diri sendiri adalah tiang budi pekerti yang utama. Yang sanggup memikul hanyalah orang yang kemanusiaannya tinggi. Their sense of humanity is high. That means the self-dignity is so high. That's why they believe in themselves. Percaya kepada diri sendiri menimbulkan kemahuan yang kuat dan kehendak. Menimbulkan usaha sendiri adalah timbul daripada jiwa yang merdeka. Once you believe in yourself, he says, you will become very powerful as a person. You become a courageous person. But he goes on to say, and this is where he departs from all these positive psychology book, he says, the only way to instill kepercayaan kepada diri sendiri, pertama ialah melalui tauhid. To believe that Allah is the one who will make you feel confident about themselves. But the other thing, and we discussed this before, is takdir. That predestination or fate is not only decided by Allah. Allah decides everything for you. Allah has determined everything for you. But you are given the choice to determine the fate that you are going to get into. So Allah says this beautifully. In Surah Al-Isra, He says, Man ihtada fa innama yahtadi li nafsi wa man dhalla fa innama yadillu 'alayha wa la taziru waziratun wizra ukhra wa ma kunna mu'adzibina hatta nab'atha rasula. Allah says that whoever sets a right, he sets a right for himself. Whoever takes the right way, he takes the right way for himself. And whoever takes the wrong way doesn't become confident, doesn't become brave, doesn't become courageous, not believing in themselves. He takes the wrong way based on his own accord and his own choice. And no man or woman is answerable to one. You cannot blame anybody else for the choice that you have made for your life. Because Allah has given you choices. And whichever choice that you take will be your fate. Right? Yes. And we must take control. So he is saying here that one who believes in him or herself is one who takes controls of his faith and his fate, and knows that everything is based on cause and effect. What you do is what you get. What you reap is what you sow. What you plant, the seed that you put in, is what will grow. And knowing that will make you feel very confident. You don't need to listen to David Goggins, Napoleon Hill, who else? Anthony Robbins to understand this. If you read the Quran, if you look at what Islam is teaching us, Islam teaches us to believe in ourselves as much as we must believe in the power of Allah. And this is very important.
Yes, and then Hamka reinforces what Prof just mentioned, and he says, what if you don't have this belief in takdir? So he says, kalau hanya percaya kepada diri sendiri, tidak ada pertalian dengan kepercayaan akan kekuatan yang lebih tinggi, maka pada permulaannya belumlah terasa kelemahan. Tapi nanti pada akhirnya, di ujung perjalanan akan timbullah keinsafan bahawasanya tidaklah segala yang dituju selalu tercapai, melainkan ketentuan Tuhan jugalah yang terjadi. So he says, you may not feel it in the beginning, but in the end, you will realize that you won't achieve anything that Allah didn't decree for you. And
now, what's interesting going on from there is that Hamka encourages everyone to be self-reliant. And this goes back to, again, our community. Do not be a community that has a crutch mentality. Yes. That want freebies, free lunches, subsidies. We have become a subsidy dependent generation. Of course, we should get some vouchers along the way. It is our money anyway. But the point is that we must not become a dependent group of people, especially Muslims. We must become people who are courageous to take control of our journeys and our success. And then he says in page 306, sebab itu berusahalah sendiri dan jangan mengharapkan pertolongan orang lain. Bukan semestinya kita tak minta tolong daripada orang lain. We must ask for help, bantuan when we need it. But he says, do not at every step of the way ask people to help us. Because when you always ask people to help all the time, you don't help yourselves. And he says, dalam agama berkali-kali diterangkan, ketika terjadi perhitungan di akhirat kelak, tiap-tiap manusia akan ditanya segala usaha dan amalan-amalannya tersendiri. And this is very, very important for us to instill also to our children. To not become kids that everything you do, you want your parents to help you. Right? They call it helicopter parenting now. Right? Where the parents are always watching over the kids, what's happening. And then, even before the kid asks for help, they would help the kid first to make sure that the kid does not fail. Failure is part of learning. Failure is part of becoming courageous, and failure is part of success. Now, I have another book that I want everyone to read in your spare time, other than Falsafah Hidup, and it's published by Cambridge University Press. It's a very, very powerful book. The title of the book is Resilience: The Science of Mastering Life's Greatest Challenges. Now, the author talks about why the a resilient group of people are the people that have the most breakthroughs in society. And again, go back to the Germans and the Japanese. Even though the Germans suffered from 2 world wars, the Japanese suffered from 2 atomic bombs. But if you look at the best technological advances in our time, these are the 2 societies who were subjugated, who were defeated, but they rose after their defeat. Why did they rise after defeat? The simple reason is courage, but more importantly, that comes with courage is resilient. What is resilient? Resilient means that they take every tragedy, crisis, obstacle as opportunity. And they are a totally different group of people in the world, these 2 groups. The Japanese is especially most special because right now we hear news that there will be a tsunami coming in Japan. The Japanese are scared, but they are brave enough to also face it through new inventions. So they have not a lot of inventions to ensure that their buildings can withstand tsunami. While if you look at many Muslim countries, when there is an alert for tsunami, dah takdir lah. Right? There is a quota that they give. Mungkin maybe about 10,000 will die. Inshallah they will go to heaven. The resilience that we have, even though we can face tragedies, is not translated into the resilience of coming up with new inventions that can help society as a whole.
Yes. And maybe just concluding from Prof's call to resilience, we end with Hamka's call to action, where he says this resilience and courage that the adults have. So he says, orang yang percaya kepada diri sendiri nescaya mempunyai cita-cita yang tinggi. We must dream big. And then he says, jika cita-cita itu tumbuh pada diri pemuda, akan tumbuhlah kelak dalam kalangan bangsa itu suatu tenaga hidup yang membawa pembaharuan. It will bring into the society a spirit of achieving success. Sebab pemuda adalah cermin zaman yang akan datang. Jika bangsa itu lemah, pemudanya hendaklah mempunyai cita-cita dan himmah yang tinggi supaya menjadi kuat. Jika dia dijajah bangsa lain, pemudanya akan berjuang melawan penjajahan itu sehabis daya. Dia hendak tegak sebagaimana orang lain tegak, dan di dalam berpuluh tahun bahkan sampai beratus tahun tegaklah kebesaran dan kemegahan sampai nama bangsa itu tercatat selama-lamanya di dalam sejarah. So the chapter of courage ending with how it will lead to success.
And beautiful that he ends with young people. Yeah, that's a nice quote that you take there. He says that the people who are supposed to exhibit this courage are the young people. They ought to be the vanguard of society, and they ought to show this courage so that the rest of the society will follow.
Yes, thank you so much.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Hamid.
Thank you so much, Prof.
Very good discussion.
And that was a good conclusion to chapter 6. Inshallah, we are left with 2 chapters with Prof. Keadilan and the conclusion. Thank you so much everyone for joining. Do your reading before the next session, inshallah. Thank you for listening. Those in person as well, Prof. And Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.